thank you for being here. I also want to thank all the people and organizations who have shared so generously their expertise and experiences. I want to give a special thanks to SADA for their recent SEL and the Arts conference, as well as Scott, Edgar, and Bob Morrison's professional development on SEL and the arts. I have relied heavily on these for the terminology and examples in the SEL portion of this presentation. Before I begin, I also want to let you know I will provide a link in the actual day of the presentation online for some of the resources that I have found for these different topics. And I would like it to be a working document so that we can all continue to add stuff that we find to help each other.
Hello, my name is Mary Durfey, and I'm an elementary art teacher in the Farmington, New Mexico area. I invite you to join me for the next little while so I can share a few things that I've learned about being trauma sensitive, as well as coping strategies for us and our students. These are intentional practices for our students and ours emotional health. I'll be talking about mindfulness as well as SEL, social emotional learning competencies. Trauma sensitive practices have been on my mind for quite some time, but I believe due to the COVID happening, it's more on the forefront of everyone's mind. We know there is a lot of trauma. We know a lot of people are struggling, and we are in what could be perhaps a collective trauma. However, we are all experiencing this differently. Some of us are in rowboats and some of us are in yachts. That's the best analogy I've heard. And you could take that even further. Being trauma sensitive is about not making things worse for our students. It includes multiple factors, including clear expectations. And I'm going to focus mostly on doing no harm, on safety. For students to learn, they need to feel safe. And when they're in trauma, they do not feel safe. We need to provide control and choices for them, their autonomy as much as possible. We also are consistent to provide a warm and safe environment with high expectations. Now, this is not a deficit model. We focus on their strengths. We recognize and validate their strengths. We help build a more positive view of themselves, and we identify their strengths and help them to identify their strengths. We honor, value, and acknowledge their strengths and help them become who they are. We convey that they really matter and don't re-traumatize them by reminding them of expectations in a calm voice, reinforcing good behavior by not calling it good or bad, but by pointing out the things that we notice, because they may have experienced a lot of labeling in their trauma. We also help them feel really cared for and keep that consistency in all that we do for them. We're not very punitive. We help them save face if there is a consequence. Now let's move on to mindfulness, which really can fall under SEL, but I'm going to give it its own space here. And LCL are best practices for our students. Why? Well, mindfulness can help us get present. Trauma does the opposite. And actually, our society being really busy, we're not very present. SEL competencies, when thoughtfully embedded in our art, support our students' emotional and social learning and enriches the art education. It enriches them and it enriches the art education. It is also a very powerful way for us to advocate for the arts in this time, as we may discover we are already including a lot of SEL competencies within our art. Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall-Long, who advocates for art education at the national level, said, "We need to show why the arts should not be on the chopping block at these times." So including these competencies in our lessons and demonstrating this for administration, community, and policymakers can help us advocate for the arts, as these are evidence-based tools that are necessary for our students. Let's go ahead and start with mindfulness and also remembering to be trauma sensitive as we do it. So I like to start with a mantra. This helps promote positive self-talk. I got this idea from the Art of Education. and adapted it for my own use. I say it and then my students repeat it. I am strong, I am capable, and I am creative. And it's a lot of fun for us. I also like to do mindfulness exercises as we start. You may have heard of the rainbow breath, and there's a lot of versions. This is the only one I'm really going to do with you, but that will also help us just settle into this space. Now, notice the type of language I use. I am going to give them a lot of choice because focusing on the breath when someone's been through trauma can actually be it can be triggering for them. So I invite you, if you are comfortable, to focus on your breath as we make the colors of the rainbow with our arms. As we go up, we're going to breathe in, and as we go down, we're going to breathe out.
If it is uncomfortable to focus on your breath, focus on your arms as they come up and as they go down.
You may keep your eyes open or closed, whatever you're comfortable with. I'll keep mine open to keep this a safe space. If your eyes are open, you might want to look off into the distance and just have a soft gaze. So breathe in, red, breathe out. Breathe in, orange, breathe out. Breathe in, yellow, breathe out. Breathe in, green, breathe out. Breathe in, blue, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out, purple or violet. Yes, I skipped indigo because in my class I correlate it with the color wheel with the little guys. But we do talk about indigo. You can do it however you want. Notice I'm giving them a lot of choices, and if they choose to opt out of these, that is fine, as long as they're just sitting there quietly and not disrupting the class. Mindfulness for kids has these lovely little cards I like to use. They're made for very young children. They work for all of elementary. They work for me. I imagine you could adapt them for older, just have a little fun with them. The ones that I'm going to talk about here are fox ears and purple breath. So fox ears, we pretend to put on our fox ears and we listen very carefully. And if we're in the classroom, might be hearing the same noises, but if we're at home, we might be hearing very, very different noises. So I'll talk about, you can hear my voice. Can you hear someone else talking? Can you hear the sound of the air conditioner? How about some loud noises? Is there a dog barking? Is there noises outside that you can hear? Can you hear cars going by? And then I ask them to bring it back. Can you hear yourself breathe? And we pause. Can you hear your heartbeat? And if they do or they don't, it doesn't really matter, but it's a lot of fun. And purple breath is, and with that one, I like to go straight into an art piece because they're so focused already. With purple breath, we talk about as we breathe out, our breath is going to be purple. We have to use our imaginations and we're going to fill up the room with this purple. So we have to do it a few times. Sometimes the kids move their head. It's really fun. Afterwards, I ask them how they feel. And a lot of them are like, I feel really good. Well, what kind of values did you see in your purple? Was it tints or was it shades? Did you see light purple, dark purple? Sometimes kids tell me the color changes or it has sparkles in it or Minecraft characters in it. It's just a lot of fun. I also ask them afterwards how they feel. And most of the kids feel really good. And so I let them know if you're ever having an emotion that's just really hard for you, or you're feeling really stressed, sometimes you can do this. It can just help your body calm down. So helping them learn how these skills can be taken into other areas of their life is also powerful. Because we're art teachers, we know art itself is a great tool, a great vehicle for mindfulness. Doodling, Zentangles. Zentangles are wonderful. Dot painting, I like to do it to my voice, give some voice directions, fast and slow, etc. Wavy. Kandinsky, they could draw with crayons or oil pastels, put on some music, and they can express that however they want, lines and shapes, and then paint over it. There's so many different ways. We can also have mindful practices, how they line up, how they take their trays to the sink, things like this. Now, how do we teach them to be mindful and present if we aren't? Even if we are trying to model the behavior and we're really not grounded and present ourselves, kids pick up on that. Maybe it's our body language. Maybe it's the micro expressions. Maybe it's just the energy we bring to the room. So we need to be grounded. Take care of ourselves, just like they say on the airplane. Put the mask on yourself before you try to put it on your child or all those little kids or big kids that you're trying to help. One thing I like to think of is buckets: social bucket, emotional, spiritual, um, physical. You can have more or less buckets. And are any of these buckets leaking, or are they lacking? Are they empty? And so, what are the simple things that we can do to fill them up? How can I fill up my social bucket during this time a little bit more? Another interesting thing is, and I will have links for some of these ideas that maybe need further explanation, is with positive psychology. They talk about core values, and there's 25 across all cultures. And what are your core values, and how can you bring those into the daily things that you do every day? Dance party for one. I told my students the other day, you've been on the computer too much today. Afterwards, get off and have a little dance party. Turn the music up and dance. And I did it, and it felt amazing. And so now sometimes I've included that at the end of my classes as well as doing it for myself. Do things that bring yourself joy. Speak well to self and practice self-compassion. We want to talk to ourselves like someone we really care about and want to encourage. All emotions are okay. At the same time as we want to give space to emotions, because if we just push through or stuff it in, it causes illness and breakdowns later. So it's not good. We might need to journal, we might need to talk it out, but we also need to separate our emotions from ourselves, not identify ourselves with our emotions. Gozen had a fabulous idea with this free parenting thing they did recently, where they have these characters for each of the emotions and names for them. And the kids can talk to that emotion. So it's kind of like holding space for it, not stuffing it through, but also they are not their anxiety. I am not my anxiety. So I could do this myself and create Annabelle as my anxiety. Forgive me, any Annabelle's character. I could even draw a sketch of her. And every time she shows up, I can say, hey, Annabelle, I know you're just trying to protect me. And I am feeling stressed, but I am not stressed. And I'm okay. And just help myself through that. Now, sometimes we have really bigger traumas. Now, just as we are not therapists for our students, and if our students exhibit some really strong dissociative or behavior that is a sign there might be trauma, we get the social worker involved, we get the counselor involved so they can get them further help. And the same for us. If we find these simple types of things, talking to someone, journaling, are not working, then we need to get a therapist and get some help for ourselves. Also, there are crisis lines. So if you need something right away, it's free to text or call. Secondary trauma is a very real thing. And with so many of our students suffering, we need to watch out for that and really take good care of ourselves. From the Schools in Crisis Conference, a couple of the things they talked about, besides getting out in nature, was we need movement and stillness in our life. And so really incorporate more of these in our life, because it's not just like it's all in our head. We are in our heads a lot, right? But all that stuff gets stuck in our body. And so being able to move really helps work the stuff out of our body. And some trauma experts say that shaking it out, just like animals in nature, when they see danger, they then shake it out, could be really good for us. So we could just shake it out. I don't know if that could be re-triggering for students, so I wouldn't recommend that whole shake it out with them, but sometimes we get our wiggles out. Also, It could be physical things. We could, stroke our arms. And this could be a tool that we could share with our students too. It's like gently stroke your arm and see if that helps you calm down. Um, at the Schools in Crisis, she also talked about that. One lady talked about that pressing at the base of your skull and the top of your forehead on yourself and just breathing helps release some of the tension in the head. So find the things that work for you, and that can help you be more grounded so you can help your students more. The last one I want to say, because it's really important, is gratitude. When you feel gratitude, you are experiencing the same chemical release as when you feel happiness. So if you're having a really hard time, maybe happiness is a high bar, but gratitude is a lot easier to sit into, to find something to be really grateful for and to just really experience it. So good for you. So now we're moving on to social emotional learning. There's amazing work done by, and I'll include the links, CASEL, Castle, SETA, and places like Indiana, which have taken the art competencies and aligned them with the SEL competencies. The work is done for us, and we'll realize we're doing more than we realize. And SEL is recognizing the whole student. Marcia McCaffrey from the SEL and Arts Conference said, "We teach from a student-centered place. They have our respect for being who they are, different needs, attributes, barriers, challenges, failures, and successes. SEL gives them more tools to navigate their world." Again, it's very student-centric and very positive. Respond, connect, create, help students find their voice. We empower them by giving them a platform for their voice and let them respond to what they like and don't like artistically. We also teach them through SEL and through art how to listen to other voices as well. People want to have a noble purpose. So how can we include that in our education? Being literate in the arts promotes empathy and emotional regulation. It helps them feel heard. All learning needs to be trauma-informed and sensitive to the situation and emotions of learners. They can identify the artist they enjoy, what is their purpose, mission, profession, passion of those artists. SEL at first is about self. So starting with self, some of the goals are to help our students expand their emotional vocabulary. Well, their emotional language is emojis. So they could circle the emoji they are feeling. And I got this from professional development put on by Scott Edgar and Bob Morrison. Circle the emoji they're feeling, design their emoji, respond to artistic word, have a word bank of a whole bunch of different emotions plus the emojis. They could list artistic pieces that exemplify these emotions. All these wonderful things they could do around emotions. It can be as simple as picking the art that has the most impact that we want to share with our students. So not necessarily changing what we're teaching, but how. And remember to be culturally responsive. Social emotional learning devoid of culturally affirming practices and understanding is not SEL at all. So it's taking the whole child in. Tableau, a theater teacher taught this, but I think this would be fabulous. She introduces the sculpture and they spend some time talking about it, what they see and observe. And then she introduces Tableau, and it's where you freeze your body and your voice. So focusing on this little girl, now what is her expression? And of course, we'd spend more time with this. But then 1, 2, 3, freeze, and we make her expression. We hold our bodies just like her. And this can work really great online or with partners. She will also use a 10 frame and start with basic emotions and then get to more complicated emotional vocabulary. And they can we'll start with the basic one, 1, 2, 3, everyone look happy. And then she points out the similarities and the differences. And kids noticing this in themselves and in others is a valuable skill for them to have. And I wonder if that's even more valuable right now, where our faces are being covered with masks all the time. And you can also do this with animals, and kids can play with emotions even when they're not feeling them. So, animals, a rabbit, when they're curious, their ears are up, things like that. So, different pieces of art and really expanding that emotional vocabulary. It could be art that represents them and why. It could be art advocacy pieces um, from history and the historical context and letting them pick something that's important to them. Just remember to be trauma sensitive and have them engaged at the level they're comfortable with. I was thinking about Kehinde Wiley's work and Dorothy Lang. And then one of the examples from the conference of SEL and Arts was Norman Rockwell and the Four Freedoms. How could they create this now, contemporary? So these great ideas. Now, moving on, students should be able to articulate their own goals and personal and artistic preferences and learn to help them assess themselves. And we do this a lot in art. I do know that Scott Edgar was talking about more assessment in the middle too, not just like at the beginning and at the end, but more in the middle to stop and pause and figure out what's working, what isn't working. And also identifying this skill is really valuable every challenge or problem you need to solve in your life. So you may be already doing this. Great. How can you up your game? And what are some things you could share with the rest of us? And how can you share this with the policymakers, your community, to help advocate for the arts? I invite you to jot down any ideas that you have and share anything that might be helpful for the rest of us. SEL allows us to respond and it instead of reacting, and it is a preventative mental health care. We still have our high standards. Now, Scott Edgar and Bob Morrison talked about how we may be shifting right now from performance to connecting and creating, for that to be our main focus right now. And perhaps that's what your students need. By embedding these things, being trauma sensitive, by having more mindfulness, and by embedding the social emotional learning competencies, their well being is being cared for. And that is where inspiration gets fostered. What do we do now? Your do now takeaway. Take care of yourself first. And now I've borrowed this from Scott Edgar and Bob Morrison's SEL and Arts presentation. Give ourselves permission to prioritize the students during this time of crisis and not pressure to reach academic standardization. Utilize and maximize the cathartic power of the arts. Explore new ways to engaging students, honor students' voice and choice, and also continue to advocate for the arts with the SEL competencies. As we do these things, we will be able to lead with grace and empathy, and we will be able to help provide the safety, the caring, and the skills that our students need. Now I'm going to end how I end all my online things with my students. Art matters. You matter. Take care.